Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. We've got two very special guests today. We've got Nirpal and Trishna Baradia, and we're going to let each of them introduce themselves. But today we're going to talk a little bit about patient centricity, patient engagement, and why it's important.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
We're going to let the ladies go first. Trishna, do you want to talk a little bit?
Hi there. So my name is Trishna Baradia, and I am what you would call a patient engagement champion, and I'm also a health advocate. So I got into this space basically in my spare time. I have a regular full-time job, but in my spare time, I got into this space because I was handed a diagnosis. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2008. And I was age 28 at the time. And essentially what happened was I had quite a bad experience with my diagnosis and all the processes and things which were involved. And I wanted to basically make sure that the patient voice is being heard louder, stronger, and more effectively throughout the whole healthcare journey. So I'm sure we'll speak a little bit more about exactly what I do and why I believe that patient engagement is so important. But that's my background and why I'm involved in this space.
I have so many questions. I'm excited to actually discuss so many of them with you, because I've actually had a very similar experience with my own recent patient journey, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But Nirpal, it's your turn. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing, Darshan. So this is Nirpal Verdi. I'm the global head of transparency and disclosure at Centricity, and it's so good to be back with you, Darshan, and doing one of these podcasts. I've really enjoyed the last few that we've done, and it's been too long, so this should be fun. Let's see how this goes.
This is exciting, and again, my name is Darshan. I am principal attorney at the Kulkarni law firm, and I do a lot of work around patient centricity and patient engagement, and between all of us, it's sort of the movement that's changing the world. And we need to talk a little bit more about why that is and what it is. So let's start with the really basic question. This is the one that everyone is saying that they're doing, but no one really knows what that means. What is, and we're going to start with Trishna, because, we're going to put you in the spotlight. We're going to let you shine. What do you mean by the word patient engagement, patient centricity? Are they different? And why does it matter?
So I think, yes, they are slightly different. I think basically, for me, patient centricity, it's not about actually putting the patient at the center, which is what many people say when they're asked, what does patient centricity mean? For me, it's not about putting the patient at the center. It's about putting the patient needs at the center. Because actually, if you put the patient at the center, it's taking away the importance of other stakeholders which are involved in that healthcare journey. And so, it's about putting the patient needs at the center of everything that is done throughout that healthcare journey. And in order to achieve that, you have to have patient engagement. And that's for me, is about engaging patients at the right time, in the appropriate manner, when it's relevant, and it needs to be transparent and fair. Those are the key things for me. And yes, everyone's talking about it. Everyone's saying that they're doing it. Generally, in my experience, yes, we're getting there, but we're definitely not there yet.
Okay. And you talked about patient centricity. How is that different, you said, from patient engagement? Maybe I didn't catch that.
So basically, in my mind, in order to achieve patient centricity, you need patient engagement. So you can engage with patients without actually being patient-centric, because being patient-centric is about putting the patient needs at the center. So you can still have a project which engages with patients, but the patient needs may not be at the center of that project. It may not be ingrained into everything and every aspect of that project development, in which case, actually, it's not a patient-centric project. Because to me, patient engagement is basically that. It's any time you engage with somebody who has a health condition, which, to be perfectly honest, I'm not a big fan of the word patient, because I feel that it puts a label and it makes things, particularly when we're talking about industry and patients, it puts a label onto the patient side of things where it becomes them and us. At the end of the day, everyone's a patient. of
Sure.
something at some point in their lives. So I like to talk about people with a certain condition, because then that way you're looking at somebody for who they are and not what they have.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. I mean, I really didn't think about that breakout in the world that I play in and work with sponsors. Patient partnership has been the expression that we've really been talking about. And I agree with you. I think sponsors have not gone far enough to really understand what that means and how to embed patients' participation and their needs all the way through that development life cycle and maybe beyond. Patient centricity seems to be the label that a lot of sponsors that I've spoken with feel they need to show some sort of engagement. And how sincere that engagement is questionable, just because I'm not saying they don't have those right intentions, but it's a means to an end. They don't give me the impression that they're trying to put the patient need into those building blocks and really consider that as they either are working through discovery and what the patient's needs are, or actually that development life cycle in which you're trying to work through, what's best for the patient, rather than telling them that's the case, and showing how you're trying to sort of engage with them, provide them some information here and there, and therefore I've ticked my box that I'm patient-centric. So we'll go into that in a lot more detail, but I think we're at those early stages, and Trishna, it would be great to get your perspective on where you see our industry going through this, and whether you've seen any change in your condition, how you've been sort of asked to engage with pharmaceutical sponsor organizations.
Yeah, so I have seen some change, and I think a lot of advocates, I speak to a lot of advocates because I'm not just involved in the multiple sclerosis space, I'm involved across disease areas, because when you talk about things like patient engagement and things like health literacy, use of technology in healthcare, that actually spans all patient communities rather than just being in one particular disease area. And a lot of advocates that I've spoke to, they also find the same thing, that yes, that intention is there, and the fact that we're even talking about this shows that things have changed, because say 20 years ago you didn't have roles like chief patient officer or global head of patient advocacy. However, traditionally the pharmaceutical industry in the UK, in Europe, obviously we all know, very highly regulated, and you don't have direct to consumer marketing of drugs, and the patient was seen as somebody that industry couldn't talk to, and they weren't allowed to talk
Trishna?
to. Yep.
What I'd like to do is actually, you're getting into a really in-depth conversation, which I'd love to explore a little bit further. What I'd like to do with this second is maybe we can talk about that in the next podcast, because there's so much there to explore. Nirpal, do you want to, any last second words?
Yeah, it's just, I had the pleasure of meeting Trishna, what is it, almost a year ago, where we sort of bumped into each other, and, once I got a bit of your background, I expressed some of my frustration with the way I saw our sponsor organizations sort of dealing with patients, and the sort of the way they were trying to work through guiding them, training them, and then using them in a very sort of small way to review types of outputs. And I felt really passionately that, well, that's not really trying to get the perspective of a patient. And if you're trying to get a narrow advocacy group to review some of these things, well, at least get them in the right therapy area that you're talking about, and have a specific interest in your disease state. So that was my perspective on.
And we're going to discuss that and more very, very soon. So thank you guys. This was amazing. Stay tuned for the second podcast. We'll be talking very soon.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or the show's website at darshantalks.com.